If we could ask everyone to please rise.
Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. L'chaim, everybody.
That translates to, Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, creator of the fruit of the vine.
You guys can sit down and relax.
Yeah, please.
What we just did was a really simple blessing over the wine. And these guys are going to talk more in depth, but basically wine is a sacrament for a lot of different religions, and it is a way to start off a meal, start off holidays. The one thing that's interesting about today, it being Friday, the longer version of that blessing starts off talking about the fact that it was the 6th day, which is Friday, and the Lord was pretty pooped out after making the world and whatnot, and decided that he was going to rest the next day. So the Kiddush, that blessing, is a really interesting way of starting off the next step of spirituality. And in the Jewish faith, we have Shabbat, the Sabbath, which is in a lot of other faiths as well. And that's the day to stop and rest and reflect and be a human. And it's actually not as religious as people think. It's much more about being spiritual. And that's what your panel is going to talk about today. So cheers, and we'll time until I pass down.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Donnie. Well, welcome everybody. We're not going to make you get up and sit down frequently throughout the program, so don't worry about that. That's unlike church in that way.
You will have to kneel for a good bit of it.
Before we really get into it, I'd like to thank our sponsors. We have some really great sponsors today. Chartreuse, of course, Benedictine, Bonal, Del Maguey. That kind of sounds like the lineup of what I drank last night. So. I also want to thank our apprentices who are helping out today. The drink that you're drinking, which I'll describe in a moment, is thanks to them and their hard work. JR, John, Jason, and Logan, of course. Thank you all. If everyone would give them a round of applause. The drink that you have in front of you is called a Kykeon, K-Y-K-E-O-N, number 2. And it's a blend of Bonal, Benedictine, Verjus, which is an unfermented wine, honey, and barley water. I'm going to give you a little introduction, and then I'll explain to you a little bit more why we chose that drink. But just so you know what you're drinking, that's it. I guess before man ever existed, cocktails existed. And what I mean specifically by that is obviously there is the definition of cocktails from 1806, which includes a spirituous liquor of any kind, water, sugar, and bitters. But if we really look at the ingredients, the fact is that it's a strong and a weak element put together. And I think that if you condense it to that core, then we can see before man ever walked foot on the planet that there were cocktails. Because all it takes is something like honey or figs, which are produced by animals in nature or by nature itself. And they, to that you add Saccharomyces or yeast, and it creates alcohol, it creates CO2, it is a sour, fizzy, pungent drink that's about 2 to 3% alcohol. So in that sense, alcohol predates us, and cocktails predate us. So you can add a hallelujah to that. Though we live in a world of many religious creeds right now, and certainly different viewpoints on religion in general, it's hard to imagine that early humans really lived in a world that was dominated by religious and spiritual thought. If you think about it in terms of, rituals, in terms of agricultural rituals, in terms of life and death, what Father Bill later will refer to as matters of ultimate concern. Those were entwined with their lives and religion, and in that way it's pretty easy to link alcohol or cocktails and religion. But there really is actually a very special relationship between alcohol and religion outside of that. And from the very beginning of humanity, and especially when we start to see humans develop symbolic thought, and they try to grasp for meaning in a primitive and cruel world. You can imagine, honestly, what early humans went through without the creature comforts that we have, such as PDT in New York, or air conditioning. They lived surrounded by predators such as large cats and other hominids that could have attacked them. Didn't have much shelter and not a lot of food. In that situation, religion probably provided a great deal of comfort. And I'm always struck by the comment by Karl Marx that is often quoted, that religion is the opiate of the masses, but a lot of people don't recognize that he follows that with a statement that says it's a heart in a heartless world. And you can imagine that that's exactly what it provided to early humans, and likely the same as what alcohol provided to early humans, as they were kind of in cave cathedrals, playing flutes, singing, dancing, and drinking. So William James, who wrote the Variety of Religious Experiences, puts it a little more eloquently. He says, "The sway of alcohol over mankind is unquestionably due to its power to stimulate the mystical faculties of human nature, crushed to earth by the cold facts and dry criticisms of the sober hour. Sobriety diminishes and discriminates and says no. Drunkenness expands, unites, and says yes. It is in fact the great exciter of the yes function in man." Amen. So humans developed symbolic thought some 100,000 years ago, and this is likely when they looked upwards in the sky and began thinking religious thoughts, when they began singing, when they began dancing. Well, they might have danced before that, for all I know. But when they began developing language and communicating these religious thoughts with each other. There is no proof, of course, that these early humans were drinking, because the way to analyze vessels and that sort of thing didn't really, and unfortunately those things were ephemera, they're gone. They were likely drinking out of bones or some kind of immediately wooden structures or whatever it was. They're gone, so we don't know what they were drinking, how they were drinking. But there really is some reasonable evidence when we look at animals, and primates especially, that humans were drinking that long ago. I mean, it's certain that primates drink even today. I don't know if you know this. But Darwin also describes baboons getting drunk and then feeling hungover the next day and actually acting a little ornery because of it. So I'm sure some of you can actually relate to that today. But also I'd say that just because cocktails or because alcohol is so easy to create in nature, it's available, you can just walk up to it and you can eat fermented fruit, and there you have it. So it's definitely available, and it's likely that they drank at the beginning of symbolic thought. But then we see about 40,000 years ago something interesting appear in the caves in Spain and France, and that's that they start to draw on these walls. They start to take a red ochre and put their handprints on the walls, early humans that is. They start to draw exaggerated forms of animals and of women's genitalia. They start to depict these sort of shamanistic images. What's interesting about that is that this is also a time that they were likely drinking in these caves. We see that these were where shamans would go into the caves. They would paint, there were flutes sometimes found nearby, they would likely sing and dance. In fact, there's some acoustic archaeology that points to the fact that the flutes themselves may have been, or the voices may have been amplified within these caves. So you have early sort of cathedrals and performances. And broadly based on sort of ethnographic studies of contemporary hunter-gatherers, you can see that this is really likely that they're drinking alcohol, but there is no smoking gun there, but it looks pretty good. After this, they start to depict something called the Venus, which is a sort of exaggerated female form. Specifically about 25,000 years ago, and I know that we're going gingerly through history, but 25 years ago, the Venus of Lascaux is depicted as having a horn, which later this horn starts to show up in a lot of different early images, and it was likely an alcohol, for drinking alcohol out of that was why it was important to be depicted in the first place. So this Venus starts to get outside of the caves, and it starts to be created into small idols. And then in eastern Turkey, you start to see it pop up at the earliest discovered. I say discovered because there's certainly more to discover, but the earliest discovered religious structures, such as the Göbekli Tepe in eastern Turkey. And the Navali Kuri. And in both of these areas, which were probably about 10,000, 9,000, 10,000 years ago, you see that they are littered with drinking vessels. There is no proof of alcohol being served there, but there's certainly a reasonable cause that they were drinking as they were celebrating in this early religious structure. It's the earliest religious structure ever found. They were depicting animals and the Venus image. And all of this sort of points to festivals of drinking and religion and this exchange between religion and drinking. But at the same time, you start to see the domestication of figs, and you start to see honey as well appearing. And honestly, shortly thereafter, in about the 9th century BC, you see evidence of the cultivation of raspberries, blackberries, cherries, and elderberry, which were easily used for alcohol production as well, very simple alcohol production. So I don't know if you caught that, but I said elderberry is about 9,000 BC. That means Saint Germain actually dates to some 11,000 years ago. A lot of people don't know that. But so, bad joke. Sorry, sponsors. So this is Neolithic times, right? And this is before writing exists. That's why there's only just a little bit of evidence, and most of it is found by archaeologists. Most of it is theoretical. But whatever the scant evidence there is, it really does at least point to the fact that these beverages were not just wine or beer, that they were in fact mixed drinks. And that is exactly why we serve the kikion. Kikion is a word from Greek which means to mix, and it's a beverage that shows up in the Iliad. And it is a combination of honey, barley, and unfermented grape juice or verjus. And so we add that to banal and Benedictine, so it's our little modern take on what these ancient beverages tasted like. But really, ancient beverages, the first one that we really do know and have evidence of is about 6,000 BC in China. And it is, of course, a mixed drink. It is a combination of fermented rice wine, basically rice wine, honey, and a wormwood derivative. So that's pretty close to vermouth. So vermouth comes a little after Saint Germain, I guess. But then you have the growing domestication and complexity within society. Obviously, there's great organization within society. We see writing, we see pottery, all of this, and now we can start to chart the history of alcohol from there. Of course, everything before is the prehistory of alcohol. And as societies become more stratified, then you see them focusing primarily on wine and beer. So I've always felt, and still feel to this day, that cocktails are the people's choice. Now, I only have a second to go. Sorry, gentlemen, I'll be real quick. But I want to talk about embodied material culture. That's what this really is. We're talking about alcohol is something that we ingest, and it's part of our material culture, but it also changes us. And it's one of the reasons why it's so integral to the religious experience, because it creates essentially a liminal state. A liminal state means somewhere in between your normal state and some other state, some other place. And it's one of the reasons why alcohol is, I believe, so intertwined with religion. And so as we see the evidence along the way, we also see some of the reason why that might be so. Well, I'd like to turn over the panel to Ron Cooper, who is going to tell you a lot more.